Why do dispensationalists constantly predict things that are going to happen, but then they pull back and say, well, it could be, and they don't hold to anything that they speculate about? They do that because they believe Jesus did the same thing. They believe Jesus predicted certain things to his apostles, to Jesus' own enemies, that didn't come to pass. So this is the beginning of the dispensational movement. Dispensational movement is the propaganda that we are in the last days, even though the apostles said they were in the last days. And you say, well, aren't we in the last days? Well, I would say the last days of what? In the first century, the apostles were in the last days of the Old Covenant. And you'll see this grounded in the first century over and over again. It wasn't the last days of the New Covenant, because according to Isaiah 9:6, it says the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of the Messiah, will have no end. There's no such thing as the last days of the kingdom of God. There's no such thing as the last days of anything other than the Old Covenant. When Jesus is on the Mount of Olives in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, Jesus is giving prophecies to the last days of the Old Covenant, which he was in and fulfilling at that time. That's why they said, they looked at the Temple Mount when Jesus is going to predict these things about the end of the world. Now, if you're a King James only guy, then of course you're not looking at the Greek. You don't care about the Greek because the world in your mind means globe. It doesn't mean globe in the Bible, never does. Noah's world was destroyed according to 1st and 2nd Peter, but we don't see the globe destroyed, right? And also the Greek is aeonos. In the Greek, it means age. So the end of the age. What age was Jesus living in? He was living in the Old Covenant age. That was the last days. That's why we see over and over again the first century believers was calling the days they were in was the last days. The last days of what? The last days of the Old Covenant. We see in Hebrews chapter 1, this is God has in the past spoken through the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. And we see this in Acts chapter 2. It says, God is pouring out his Spirit on all flesh. And this is that. So according to Peter, what was happening on the day of Pentecost is exactly the fulfillment of what Joel said would happen in the last days, not in the last days of the new covenant. Because of his kingdom and government, there shall be no end.